4 women walked into a lecture hall at the University of Pittsburgh and said nothing to anybody. That was the study. Richard Moreland and Scott Beach had them pose as students in a large course. One attended no classes at all. The others attended 5, 10, and 15. They arrived early, sat near the front where everyone could see them, took notes, left early, and never spoke to a single person in the room. At the end of the term, 130 students rated them from photographs. The students did not recognize them and did not report them as familiar. But the ratings climbed with attendance. The woman who never came scored lowest on attractiveness. The one who came 15 times scored highest. Nobody interacted. Nobody was charming. The only variable was how often she was there, which sets up the problem with almost everything you have been told about being missed. 6 things the research says, and number 2 is where the popular advice actually comes from, and what it actually found. 1. Absence on its own makes people like you less. The classroom result is one demonstration of the mere exposure effect, first named by Robert Zajonc. Repeated exposure to something with no reward attached tends to increase liking for it. It works with faces, shapes, sounds, and nonsense words. And it works below the level of anything you would call a decision. Now, run it backwards, because that is the version nobody says out loud. If showing up more makes people warmer toward you, then disappearing does the opposite by default. The advice to vanish so that somebody appreciates you is fighting one of the most reliable findings in social psychology, and fighting it with a strategy that has no evidence behind it. I want to be precise. This is about liking, not about grief. Someone deeply attached to you does not stop loving you because you left the room. But the general drift across ordinary human relationships runs toward the people who are present and away from the people who are not. 2. Playing hard to get failed 5 times in a row. This is where the whole genre comes from, and the actual paper is not what people think. In 1973, Elaine Walster, William Walster, Jane Allen Piliavin, and Lynn Schmidt set out to demonstrate the folk wisdom that a hard-to-get partner is more desirable. They ran 5 experiments. All 5 failed. That is the author's own word for it in the paper. Then they ran a 6th with 71 male students and worked out what was really going on. They separated 2 things that had been jammed together: how hard someone is for you to get, and how hard they are for everyone else to get. The winner was the person who was easy for you to get and hard for everybody else. Selectively available, not generally unavailable. That person was rated as having all the advantages of the aloof option and none of its costs. So the finding beneath the entire disappearing act is close to the reverse of the advice. It is not go quiet and be unreachable. It is be warm and open with this person specifically, while not being that way with everyone. And note the sample, because that is one small study on male undergraduates from 1973, and it should not be carrying as much weight as the internet makes it carry. 3. They will miss the work you were doing that neither of you could see. Here is a mechanism nobody mentions. In 2006, James Cone, Hilary Schaefer, and Richard Davidson put 16 married women in a brain scanner and told them they might receive a mild electric shock. They measured the neural threat response in 3 conditions: alone, holding a stranger's hand, and holding their husband's hand. Holding the husband's hand reduced the threat response most, and the effect was strongest in the women who reported the highest marital quality. 16 participants is very small, so hold the size of it loosely. What the finding points at is an idea Cone later developed, that the presence of a trusted person is doing continuous regulatory work. Your nervous system quietly offloads part of the job of handling the world onto the people close to you, which means the missing arrives in a strange form. Not as a thought about you, as a general sense that everything has become slightly harder to handle, and no obvious reason why. 4. Part of who they are leaves with you. Erica Slaughter, Wendy Gardner, and Eli Finkel ran 3 studies published in 2010 on what happens to the self after a breakup. They measured something called self-concept clarity, which is how clearly and confidently a person can describe who they are. It dropped after breakups, and that drop predicted emotional distress on its own, over and above the distress explained by the loss itself. Their line for it is that partners come to finish each other's sentences and then over time each other's selves. So the question people ask, when will they miss me, has a second layer under it. Somebody who built part of their identity around you does not experience your absence as a missing person. They experience it as not knowing who they are on a Tuesday afternoon. That is also why the recovery involves new clothes, new hobbies, and new routines so often. It looks like moving on. It is closer to rebuilding a definition, One ordinary decision at a time, and it takes as long as it takes. 5. Nobody notices what stays constant. Every sensory system you have is built to report change rather than steady states. You stop feeling your watch. You stop hearing the fridge. Constant input fades from awareness because a signal that never varies carries almost no information. People work the same way. And this is the part that is genuinely unfair. Somebody who is reliably there becomes background. Not because they are unappreciated in any deliberate sense, but because a stable presence stops generating any signal to notice. And the moment it stops, it becomes the loudest thing in the room, because now there is change, which produces the cruel timing at the center of this question. The people who are most consistent are missed the hardest and noticed the least. Reliability makes you invisible while you're present, and enormous once you're gone. There is no version of being dependable that also gets you noticed in the moment. That is worth knowing if you have ever felt taken for granted by someone who would be devastated to lose you. Both of those things can be true at once, and usually are. 6. Missing runs on cues, not on a countdown. So here's the actual answer to when it is not 2 weeks. It is not 30 days of no contact. The internet has invented a schedule that does not exist. Missing is triggered, and the triggers are environmental, a particular seat in the car. The hour you always called a song, a smell, a route home, a specific chair, absence goes unnoticed for long stretches and then arrives all at once because a cue fired and the thing it pointed at was not there. Which explains a pattern people find confusing about themselves. Someone can go a fortnight without a serious thought about you, and then be undone in a supermarket aisle. That is not inconsistency. That is a cue-dependent system doing exactly what it does. And the practical consequence is that you cannot schedule this. The date somebody misses you is set by their routines, not by your strategy, and you have no access to it. Put the 6 together and the honest answer is not the one the title promises. You cannot make someone miss you on demand. Absence reduces liking rather than increasing it, and the waiting does most of its damage to the person doing the waiting. The famous hard-to-get finding was 5 failures and 1 result about selective warmth. What people actually miss is the regulation you were providing, the part of their identity you were holding, and the routines you were woven into. And it arrives when a cue fires, on a schedule you do not control, which points at something worth saying plainly. If you're currently going quiet so that somebody misses you, look closely at that plan. It is built on someone else's pain arriving on time, it is not supported by the research, and the waiting will cost you far more than it costs them. The people who are missed most are not the ones who staged an exit. They are the ones who were genuinely present in enough of somebody's life that their absence leaves holes in the furniture. That is not a technique. It is a description of what you were actually doing while you were there. And if you're the one missing somebody right now, the mechanisms in this video are worth knowing for a different reason. What you're feeling is not weakness or obsession. It is a nervous system that offloaded work onto a person who is gone, a self-concept rebuilding itself, and a set of cues still pointing at an empty chair. All 3 settle. None of them settle on a schedule either. That is the cue most people miss. Which one of the 6 was true for you? Leave it in the comments. Subscribe to Psychology Q, and I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.